You are listening to Frog Talk, presented by Black Ribbon.
Thank you so much for joining me on Frog Talk. Today, we're exploring the fascinating world of organizational change management, particularly the inherent challenges of implementing necessary transformations in the face of human resistance. We'll examine how understanding human nature, building trust, and fostering community can help bridge the gap between acknowledging the need for change and actually embracing it. I have the great pleasure of speaking with a good friend and colleague of mine, Bryan Burkholder, lead consultant at Cadence Consulting. Bryan brings a unique perspective to change management, combining extensive experience in corporate transformations with years of pastoral leadership. This distinctive background has given him deep insight into human behavior, organizational dynamics, and the delicate balance between preserving core values and embracing necessary change. Welcome, Bryan.
Thank you, Nadir. It's great to be here with you today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming. It's a pleasure. So just to get things started, could you share a story about a time when your experience as a pastor provided an unexpected insight into managing corporate change?
Yeah, in the pastoral world, you really have to balance the needs of the congregation with the needs of the individual. It is a tightrope constantly walked by churches of 100 people or churches of 5,000 people, where and corporate culture is no different. Balancing the needs and shepherding the needs of the organization as a whole versus shepherding the individual through change. Really, those two things really align very well. So in the corporate world, it's about really recognizing the value of that individual person. So one quick story is we were working on implementing a wireless warehouse scan gun process in a shop in Ohio. And one of the great guys who knew the systems, knew the processes, knew the product really well, really had a hard time wanting to do what we were asking him to do. And so his manager and I sat down with him and said, hey, let's go through the barriers. Let's understand where the barriers are. And really through that was a really cool interpersonal opportunity to find out, man, he might have some learning disabilities or some things going on that he was too ashamed to share with his manager. And once he opened up to those things, I mean, the floodgates opened and the relationship between him and his manager was so much stronger. And we were able to actually empower him in a whole new way, understanding the resistance that he was having personally to the changes we wanted to implement. So it was really a crucial moment for him, but that's one of the success stories on that individual level of shepherding people through change, understanding, hey, the corporation's got to change. We've got to get things better and more efficient for the company as a whole. But help me understand what's going on with you. Help me understand why this is hard for you. And so that was one of our awesome success stories.
That's really cool. That's actually the hardest part, right? Even in my work, when we talk about brand strategy and branding, we're always trying to figure out what's, the common saying, what makes people tick? Like, what's that?
Right,
what that's all about? So how do you, going back to that same story, how did you actually get him to break down his walls? What did that look like?
So one of the tools is to gently, but firmly say, this is what has to happen in this job. So what we try to separate and help companies separate is the requirements of the role from the strengths and weaknesses of the individual. So as we adapt the role itself to the needs of the company, we have to look at the individuals kind of on the HR side and say, is this within their strength and skill set now that the role has adopted to the needs of the company? So separating those two things out, the individual is invaluable, in my opinion. You can't place a value on a person. They have infinite value. But the value of the role within the company is aligned to the needs of that role, right? So can this person now accomplish what's needed for this new role? So I think that's one of the key things for corporations is separating the needs of the role from the value of the individual and saying, hey, we love you, we think you're awesome, but can you do this role? Here's the new role. So, that is that tactic that we use with this individual was, hey, this is the new role. It requires the use of this handgun. So if you can't use the handgun, that's fine. We still value and appreciate you, but you can no longer do this role for this company. So we don't want to look at it in a way that is antagonistic or abrasive, and that's how you separate it, is the role from the person.
Yeah, I'm smiling because I've been having this exact conversation so many times recently because I just had it with another colleague of mine, a good friend of mine, where he's having a problem with a manager who works for him, but he's managing people. And apparently he was like a killer salesperson, just really good at biz dev and sales, but he's really not working out as a manager. And bottom line is, we all know the rogue personality. I was like, he's a rogue sales guy. He does his thing and he absolutely destroys it doing what he does, but he can't work with people. He's just not in that capacity where he's able to even manage people. So I really appreciate that you look at it from this angle where the role and the person aren't necessarily the same. And you face this all the time. And when we talk about organizational change and developing an employer brand as to why someone would want to work somewhere, it always comes back down to, it's not just about filling seats, because the right people, the seat and the person aren't necessarily meant for each other, right? And like just forcing someone into a box, into a particular role because you're just trying to fill that seat, and on the side of the individual because they just want a job, is going to end up being detrimental for both sides. So I think, it's really critical to take that into consideration. So when you're actually running your programs and the way that you run your applications for change management, depending on what your client is looking for, are you addressing that on a company level, on a company-wide level as well, where you're ensuring that the individuals are set up for the right, or vice versa, the roles are set up for the right individuals?
Yeah, so we attack it role first. So we come in and say what roles, and redefining roles within the company are going to make this company successful. What I often find is with where we work in our space with mid-sized companies is that there's been a bootstrapping effort when the company was smaller, and everybody just kind of goes after it and gets work done every day. But as the company grows, what ends up happening is you start stepping on each other's toes, and roles get confused. You have AR doing AP, you've got shipping doing data entry for customer service. You've got all of this backward because, well, we're just doing it to get, everybody's just got to step up and be a team player. Well, what ends up happening as the team grows is you start stepping on each other's toes. And what we help do is define lanes for individual roles. We have to redefine those lanes. So that is really a company-wide effort, because what you'll find is that, especially as a company, a mid-sized company, the big growth inflection is defining those corporate lanes by role, and then realigning the individuals into those seats. So that's really the tactic we take, or the strategy we take, is to define the roles first, what's going to be the best, and then say, hey, can the current staff run in those lanes? And hopefully they can.
So what size companies are you working with, as far as headcount goes usually?
Yeah, headcount. So we work anywhere from 30 people up to about 200 to 250 people on headcount. So a lot of times the complexities aren't necessarily even with headcount. A lot of times the complexities are with the number of SKUs, the number of locations that headcount is spread across. So we encounter a lot of other complexities, but that's usually our sweet spot for change management with the size of boutique consulting firm we are right now.
Right. Are you Okay. Are you then, are they always looking to scale? Are you coming in to help them grow always? Or is there usually just a component of optimization and organization?
So usually it's both. Usually it's both. So our sweet spot for Cadence Consulting is going to be companies that are really looking for long-term scalability. Most companies that are looking for immediate optimization are going to find better ROI with internal resources for that optimization, or by hiring one or two people, one or two expertise type folks, whether it's fractional or whether it's a full-time employee for that role to fix a specific issue. Where we find our value add and is going to be in that long-term foundation laying, not just fixing the way the foundations are now for the current size of the business, but hopefully building with the future in mind. So, for example, one of our clients now is still operating on the operational procedures of a company of maybe 20 people. They now have 180 people. So our job is not just to rebuild foundations and processes for 180 people, but to get them scaled, have scalability in those processes to go to 300 people or 400 people, with and grow even more exponentially than they already have over the last 3 to 5 years. So that's really where our sweet spot is both fixing foundational procedural. And when I say procedural, I mean all across the board: HR, finance, sales, and operations. We go into all four of those areas, and because they're all intertwined. So you can't fix one problem without fixing another, or foundationally. And then hopefully build those foundations out for a lot of future growth. So back to your primary question, we do work to find growth-minded organizations in our space.
So you're essentially designing systems that can handle scale, can handle that growth without breaking, basically. So you're like almost looking in reverse, like creating a system that can handle up to a certain, either whether it's infinite or actually capped. It's something that can handle rapid growth or even sustained gradual growth. Either way, yeah, yeah. Either way, it's a system that can be applied and be referenced whenever there is kind of any sort of change in that capacity. Even like moving, for example, right? Like moving locations, or if it's a brick and mortar or a factory type of business, that they can scale into new locations. Is that accurate?
Yeah. And we want to help them scale eventually into the AI space. So a lot of companies looking at how do we scale into the AI space? Well, a lot of work, we work with data partners and developer partners who help us get data right, so that and data is really it's kind of this nebulous thing, but data really comes back down to human behavior. Who's putting the data in? How is it getting entered into the software systems of that company, into that software stack? So we go not just to data. Data is fun to look at, it's great, but we go all the way to, well, who's putting that data in? How are they putting it? Why are they putting it in that way? And really helping the company align their procedurals. The very beginning piece of any data set is going to be human behavior. So we really try to help the company go all the way down to those very root foundational systems and build strong foundations.
Right. And how are people absorbing that data, right? How do
Right.
they interpret it? How are they pulling it out, and so on? Um, again, I'm smiling because we've had this conversation before,
Yeah, we have.
where the root of all of that is where what I do, where we talk about like why are you doing anything, right? Why are you doing
Right.
anything in the way that you're doing it? Why are you writing your contracts the way that you do it? Why do you use this language? Why do you have this process in place? Why do you use this software? That, like, forever why. And the response, like what I put together, is a single statement for every single time someone goes, why do you do this? And the answer should always be, because we value X, Y, and Z, and we want people to
Right.
experience A, B, and C. That's it. And then
Right.
once that's clarified, then it's like, okay, well, does this process honor that statement? Does it honor that experience? Does it honor those values? Does this product honor this? And so on and so on. And it's really cool. It's liberating because you suddenly have this very easy, not easy, simple decision making process, and then it becomes a question of logistics and procedures and so on.
Yeah, and that's really key. Something that we do not as intentionally and as intensely as you do, Nader. But we do. One of the reasons we're called Cadence is because we want people to pause, come to the end. That's what a cadence is. It's the coming to the end, finding your home beat and home plate, and starting a new process from that spot. Especially in our initial conversations, we're here to solve problems, don't and facilitate change. That's our primary objective. But to your point, without a why, without a clear North Star, it's almost impossible to have that building mechanism align corporately, which so we do the same thing, again, not as intensely as you do, but it is super, super vital to get that why clear on the beginning of an engagement for us.
Yeah, because things just, I mean, things become arbitrary at that point. It's like, well, it's the tactician versus the strategist conversation. Tacticians will be like, we could do this or we could do that or let's do this, and you're like, we can do everything. We could do whatever you want, but the question is, why are you doing that? How is it gonna benefit you? What does it have to do with this organization? What does it have to do with your customers? What does it have to do with your employees, and so on? So it's always like, this enthusiasm. I love the enthusiasm. I'm always like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Let's talk about what we could do. That's great, but wait, just wait.
Make sure you know why. Yeah. What along those lines, one of the fun things that we get to do is also help that ideation stop. Let's say you have a why, and then we're ideating on all the things that could happen. Well, at some point, we've got to go execute on that, and we cannot constantly just shift to the next squirrel or the problems that keep arising, because we're here to fix foundational things. Our one of the CEOs I work for said, "Is anything really happening? I still see these same problems." And I said, "Here's what I want you to imagine. I want you to imagine that we're working in your basement. You live on top line revenue. That's where your brain lives. But we're working in the basement. We're putting up temporary supports and chunking out all the bad concrete. We're not even to repouring yet. We just have temporary supports up. So you're not seeing anything happen because we're just trying to make sure the house doesn't fall down while we rebuild these foundations." So that metaphor seems to help folks who want to see quick results, especially if they're sales minded CEOs.
That's such a good analogy. I like, you can picture it so well. That's a perfect segue, by the way. So I want to. There's sort of like a double two questions I want to address. What are the common patterns of resistance that you see? This is like inherent to change management. So across different types of organizations, going back to whether it's a religious institution or corporation, and then can you walk us through also how you approach convincing more traditional organizations to actually embrace modern practices?
In an organization that's really anywhere over 50 people, you cannot include all the stakeholders in the conversation, decision making process. You can include key stakeholders, and you want to, as you develop a new role and develop a process for a new role, and really lay that out in writing. What I've found is upon presenting that new idea, that new process, it usually takes 3 or 4 times of communicating that process before you are able to wear down resistance. In the change management curve, you've got the ideators, the early thinkers, the strategists, then you've got people who are kind of early adopters. If you don't get your early adopters on board, your pragmatists, that this is very practical, and be very honest with those pragmatists. So a lot of times companies in change management make the mistake of going, oh, this is going to be so much better for you. And the pragmatists are going, BS, this is going to be way harder for me. I don't know what you're talking about. This is easier for you in the C-suite. It's not easier for me. So as soon as you say, nope, this is harder, this is more work, we're trying to make it as efficient as possible. But it is different and it is going to be a little bit harder until you learn how to do it. That gets your pragmatists on board. So your pragmatists are one level, and then you've got your stick in the mud kind of people, right? And I'll bunch everybody together. And it takes the pragmatists being on board in order to really to turn that corner, to get over the hump to that resistance. So just tactically, one of the key things that you'll find people do is break the 80-20 rule. So you're presenting a new process, a new task that you're asking to do, or a change of methodology of how to execute work holistically. And people go, well, what about this? What about that thing? What about this case? I had this happen the other day. That wouldn't work for this. And change management, whether you're managing it on a large scale or a small scale, you've got to keep reminding people about that. Well, this process is written for 80 to 90% of the cases will flow through this. And we don't want to have one-off cases for everything that we do. Our processes cannot just be every single time we do something different. That's not a process. So this is the process we're going to follow for 80 to 90% of our, and that really usually quells the pitchforks and torches when people are frustrated about changing their processes. So identify, usually what I say is acknowledge those one-offs, but bring them back. This is going to happen, and it's going to work for 90%, 80 to 90% of our daily activities. So we vetted it. We've got all the right people in place. It wasn't wasn't an ivory tower decision where we just snapped our fingers and decided this is how we're going to do it. And so that usually brings those people along pretty well. I hope I answered your question. I rambled a little bit, but
No, you did. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's usually the two big things we encounter. Is to sum up: one, your pragmatists are not on board because you didn't tell them the truth, and then two, people raise those individual cases where the process wouldn't work as a reason to not do it. Really, that's not a reason to not do it.
How long are your project life cycles usually, like minimum to maximum?
So minimum is going to be about 6 months, depending on the scope of the fix. So in the case of a company we worked with in Missouri, it was a little over 6 months, and mostly it went a little over because they got a new GM, and I had to restart the internal sales cycle, basically, with that plant, and get him on board relationally, and prove that we knew what we were doing to him. And once he was on board, man, we went faster than we ever had that whole project. So the long side, I would say, is 2 years. So when a company is looking ahead, one of our very first engagements, we deployed change management through an ERP deployment, and changed basically every process in the whole company with the new ERP. And then they had a CEO change right afterward. So we stayed on for this relational sake of stability and kept doing the projects we were doing because the CEO left, or excuse me, the COO left, the CFO left with the new CEO coming into place. They lost probably five or six key roles in the operational side, and they were short personnel, key personnel operationally for quite a bit. So we stayed on to continue the implementation of the ERP through the HR shifts that were happening, seismic shifts that were happening due to the leadership transition. So that was a longer one just because they pulled those two change management triggers back to back. So we stayed on for a bit. But ultimately our goal, Nadir, is to get out. So we embed ourselves, we ramp in, we're in there, we're executing work, we're working alongside leadership, we're working alongside end users, all the way down to the end user, to rebuild these foundations. And then our goal is to get that cement set and really start to back ourselves out. And by the end of it, we're taking down those temporary structures, and you've got room to grow.
Yeah, you and I share that model. We want to become obsolete. We want to make ourselves insignificant. Um, but so I want to focus on those sort of, I guess, roadblocks could be a good word when you're going through a longer project life cycle and those changes happen, those human changes happen, people leave, people are replaced, and so on. Um, what how do you deal with that? I mean, when it comes to helping even the leadership and the stakeholders balance, it's change brings instability regardless of how you slice it. So like whether it's, organizational instability or personal instability, people are getting stressed out, employees feel maybe unsafe or whatever. How are you mitigating that, both from a pragmatic standpoint, but also an emotional perspective? Like, how do you deal with that kind of stress and that kind of load on the team, on the organization itself?
Yeah, it's a huge load, and the pardon my pastoral past and using analogies and metaphors. That's just what I do. So one of the pictures I use is you're going from mountaintop to mountaintop, right? So you can go through the sludge of going down the valley, trying to ford the river, but what that looks like is losing profits. What that looks like is you losing revenue. And so the investment to build the bridge, which is what we help do. So that's the other analogy I use when it comes to managing that shakiness. And it is shaky. It's a temporary structure to go from this mountain to that mountain. It's a shaky bridge. And that's what we're here to help you do, to get it as solid as possible without we're not building a permanent highway between the two processes. We're building a temporary structure to get from point, and we have to make sure it's robust enough for your team and the company to get across. So that is the true balancing act on the ROI, is making sure that bridge is robust enough procedurally. The bandwidth that we provide as Cadence Consulting is enough to make sure that the company has good foundations to move the people from point A to point B. So that's the analogy. And what that looks like practically is really staying in tune with how shaky that bridge is, where people are at, going and having personal conversations with key influencers, not necessarily positionally, but relationally. And having even when we're not physically in that city, making sure we're having daily touch points with those. How are we doing? This is a big change. What's going on? Where are the roadblocks? Getting that data back from the boots on the ground, not spending hours and hours just doing it, but making sure we're measuring how stable that bridge from point A to point B is on an ongoing basis. And if it starts shaking, and which happens because we're changing a lot for these companies. When it starts shaking, you go, okay, we gotta make sure this is a little more stable. We're not gonna put any more people across this until we've got a little more
Right.
stability for this bridge. Let's hit a pause. I know you want to go fast, but
Right.
let's make sure everybody's safe. You know what I mean? And the company is safe before we move
Yeah,
forward.
absolutely. So when you have those the check-ins, the
Yeah.
one-on-ones, just like talking and making sure everyone, specifically on client side, is still on board, they're understanding what's happening, you're trying to essentially calm them through all these
Yeah.
changes and so on. Is it always you doing that, or do you send other team members? For example, with me, I know very specifically that I'm not always the best person to go do that. It's a question of
Right.
relationship building. So, like,
Sure.
if the client and I have a really good rapport, then I will do that. But because that's a very sensitive conversation, it requires a certain amount of tact and so on. But I will quite literally say, I'll be like, you get like to my organizational strategist, for example. I'll be like, Ashley, you get along a lot better with this guy. You need to go
Oh,
talk to
absolutely.
him. Yeah.
It is a case by case situation. And generally, we try to run very organized processes. Like we have very specifically outlined projects that we're executing and specific teams with Gantt charts and deadlines and the works to execute on those specific projects in a strategic order. That being said, what we try to do is the project manager is the one that we're usually sending out to go, hey, how's the team doing with this project? We have, Cadence run project huddles weekly. Hey, how's your team doing? Where's the pulse on this? Here's what the data says. We went live with this project with this change. Doesn't look like people are actually doing it. Help me understand what happened in the training. So all those, we do try to delegate it. So it's not necessarily me as the lead consultant on a project doing that. I do that for the C-suite team as the lead consultant. And if there's any projects that I'm tasked to be the engagement manager on, the project manager, then I'll take those conversations.
That part is always interesting to me because, again, we have the PM as well, but it really just comes back down to rapport. Even in my earlier job, when I used to work for a company and I managed a team of designers as the creative director, we had different accounts, and they all had our clients had access to me, and I was always in the original initial conversations and so on. But then when I put project leads on different projects, since this is pretty common, we'd have cycles of the same clients coming through, and I would be like, Martin, this is all you, man. She and I don't get along. You need to talk to her.
Yeah. I literally just said that to one of our engagement managers yesterday. I was like, listen, you're so much better with these people than I am. They don't like me very much. So you got to go make sure this happens, man.
Yeah, absolutely. So talk about like initiating these projects, for someone to actually, for a client or a prospect do you get reached out to? Do they hit you up and go, we need this? Do they even know what it is? Or are you doing outreach usually yourself?
Yeah, it's usually referral based is where these contracts come from. It's people who go, hey, and as we are more embedded, and the foundations of Cadence as a company grows as well, right? So we're doing the same thing internally that we're doing externally. The reputation to shepherd through change grows. So and as we define the language of what Cadence does, which is really helps lay foundations for long-term growth in every aspect of the company. Now, usually what will happen is an organization, as I mentioned earlier, the foundations will be crumbling underneath the house because the house is too heavy. It's too big for the foundations that they built originally. And they're going, and usually what that looks like is we can't get money to the bottom line. We for some reason, our top line keeps growing, but we actually are, why are we losing money to the bottom line? So when they cannot figure it out, or in some cases they've figured it out, but they literally do not have the bandwidth to get in there and dig it out, rebuild it, because they're managing inside the business and they just do not have the bandwidth to fix the urgent problem of working in the business. We're working on the business. So usually someone's really, the house is starting to fall apart before we go. And then that's when we say, listen, we don't want to just if we're going to do all this work, you're going to make this huge investment. Let's make sure you have enough room in this rebuild to grow, not just fix where the house is crumbling down right now. When we get in there, and a lot of it's data, it's processes. I mean, usually it's the works that has to be complete. It's personnel and roles has to be completely revamped in order to give the company some room to run. So to answer your initial question, usually it's, oh crap, we are about to lose this business and it's crumbling, and our weight is too big now to actually go in and fix it. We're not as nimble as we used to be. We don't know how to fix it. We need somebody to come help us. So that's usually where we get our driver on the sales cycle side.
Yeah, you and I have also talked about this where we both want to be able to get basically in the door before as a preventative, right?
Yeah.
Like it's almost like like wellness, make sure you don't get sick. This isn't a treatment. This shouldn't be a treatment.
Right.
Like
Right.
exercise and eat well and so on,
Right.
so that you
Right.
don't get sick. And then then you won't have to deal with it and spend more later trying to fix all the things that are broken. We talk about the M&A space, mergers and
Yep.
acquisitions. This is consistent across the board. I want to get in before a transaction to ensure that all the foundational, brand strategy and communication strategy programs are in place so that there's a seamless merger or
Yeah,
combination or
absolutely.
collaboration once they post transaction. But it's always the other way around. It's like insurance. Nobody ever thinks they need it until they fall and break their leg.
Right. Well, and one of the things is like atrophy is easy, right? So atrophy requires no capital outlay, but maintenance requires capital. I'll continue with the house analogy. You can let your house fall apart. You don't have to put one red dime into keeping your house up, um, and your lights will fall apart. Your HVAC will fall apart because atrophy is real. And companies and organizations are no different. Just to maintain the quality of what you have requires capital outlay in an investment in processes and organizational investment constantly. And if you want to grow, it requires even that much more outlay. So we just remodeled our bathroom. If I had fixed up what was there, it would have cost me 10% of what I put out to actually make it really much better and basically room to grow and but the capital investment is worth it for the value of my asset. So that's what we sell is, listen, the capital outlay to keep your processes ahead of your growth is worth the outlay, because it's a reinvestment in your asset and you will see the ROI on the other end. So that's where I say if you're looking for a quick ROI for this quarter, don't hire Cadence. If you're looking for the 5-year plan, and we've got a 5-year target, but we need to get our crap in order to get to that target, then that's where Cadence can come in and make sure your foundations are laid well.
That's right. And I love that transparency. So something to think about, what is the outcome like for the employees themselves, for the organization? I always look at everything from a company culture perspective. So how do people feel once this is successfully integrated?
At the end of the day, when you go through the pain of change for the better, and goes personally and organizationally, it's painful, but you feel so much better, right? The organization feels healthier. Everyone is operating at a much higher efficiency rate. Their numbers are better. The day to day is better. The little like workarounds. This is what I see all the time. We've got all like individual users will have all these little procedural workarounds because the processes have been broken for so long. They're like, I'm just going to make my life easier. So screw y'all. So at the end of the day, the team mentality actually improves. The irony is, if you lock in those lanes, the team mentality at the end of the day actually goes up. You're through those synergies that you've created by writing down the processes and adhering to them, getting them going across the company. So the individual is both the individual and the company at large, I feel, are just in a much healthier space as far as the culture goes when there's clarity on the work that needs to be done and how it should be done, both today and for the future.
Yeah, fantastic. If you had to give just a piece of advice to anyone either looking for change management or doesn't know that what they need or what they want, what would you tell them?
Don't wait. Don't wait. The sooner you deal with broken processes and relaying those foundations instead of kicking the can down the road. Because every time you kick the can down the road, it gets bigger. So don't wait. And don't wait until you can no longer kick it and you're beating your foot against this giant can of change management, right? So don't wait. Fix things now. And if they don't get better with your internal resources, get an external resource. Don't be afraid of external resources. If it's a specific issue, hire this CFO, the fractional CFO, to come in and help you clean things up. Hire the fractional sales guy to come in and help you clean things up. Hire Nadir to help you, come get your North Star in line on where we head and why does this business even exist? So don't be afraid to hire those external resources, because the investment pays off in spades. So when you see problems, don't kick the can down the road. That's my biggest. And don't think it's just going to happen. So that's point number 2. If you're getting new software, if you're buying another company and you're merging them in and integrating them into your current company, it's not just going to happen. Oh, we have great people. They'll figure it out. They don't. They need direction. They need specific clarity on how this is going to happen. They need a plan. So don't just think that hiring great people is going to make it happen, or that, we spent all this money it'll just work. It'll just work itself out. It never does. So those are my 2 pieces of advice. Don't kick the can, and don't just assume it's going to happen.
Fantastic. I love your analogies, man. They always, they're so visceral. I can see them so clearly.
Years of preaching, man. You gotta do it.
Yeah, you got to do it. Exactly. Tell us where we can find you. Do you want to, where can we find you? On LinkedIn, on social media, your website?
LinkedIn, and you can find me at my name, Bryan Burkholder, or you can find us at Cadence Consulting Enterprises on LinkedIn. Our website is cadenceconsultants.com. And those would be your 2 great spots. Now, you can always email me, Bryan@cadenceconsultants.com. I'd love to hear from anybody listening to the podcast. Oh, that's Bryan with a Y, by the way, Bryan.
Right. Bryan with a Y, Bryan. Thanks so much, brother. It was such a pleasure having you on here. It was fun, and I'm going to see you soon.
Nadir, thank you so much for inviting me. I'll always love chatting with you, sir.
Absolutely. Take care.